trust your creative judgment entirely.
You can't trust anybody. And I was like, hell, Google, relax, Google. Yeah. Hi, it's Katie from Repeater with Grace Blakeley. And Grace is the author of Stolen, which was published on Repeater in 2019. And actually, one thing that is really obvious that came to mind is the last time you published your book, it was a general election around then. And we now have another one coming up. So yeah, I will save the hard-hitting questions for the questions that you're probably going to get in the next few weeks.
Sure.
And yeah, how are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. I also noticed that we've had a general election be called just after I published my book, and that this happened last time as well. So I think it was like 3 months after I released Stolen, there was a general election called. And I'm pretty sure like maybe even less than 3 months after I released Vulture Capitalism, a general election's been called. So it's like I have the power to like create general elections by releasing books.
True. And you need to make sure that your next book is in line.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if I want to call a general election, I'll just write another book.
Okay, well, all these interviews start with the same question, which is, what is your book and why is it relevant now? Why does it continue to be relevant?
Yeah, so the book I published, Repeater, was called Stolen, How to Save the World from Financialization. And it really looked at the growing power of finance in the UK economy and society. So it kind of traced the growth of the finance sector from the 1980s onwards, and looked at the impacts that had on, you know, everything from the way that individual households manage their finances through to the way that corporations manage their balance sheets, and just showed that financial activities, and particularly the kind of management of investments and debts, had just become a much more central part of every area of the economy. So, you know, the ratio of household debt to incomes increased dramatically. Corporations became not only more indebted, but also they kind of owned more assets and invested more assets. And the government took on a very particular approach to kind of managing its own debts, leading up to what we had in the wake of the financial crisis, which was this push toward austerity. And what I argue in the book is that you know, the kind of logic of finance has transformed all areas of economic activity, and transformed the structure of our economy as well, such that a particular class of people, so that's, you know, finance, capital, and its allies within the broader capitalist class, were able to get a huge amount more control over the British economy than what had previously been true. And you can look at this in the case of, you know, the size of the finance sector relative to GDP, but you can also look at it through things like, you know, yes, like the ratio of household debt to incomes, the size of mortgage markets, the nature of, like, as I said, corporate balance sheets, regional inequality, so the fact that London is so much more dominant than other parts of the economy. And in the book, I looked at a number of ways that we can kind of fight back against this. So my argument was always that finance has kind of come to dominate the British economy as part of a broader class-based project of, like, you know, social domination, basically, that goes back to the 1980s and the neoliberal turn. So that if we want to push back against that, then we have to build class power from the bottom up. My argument and my line was always, we need to take on the banks the way that Thatcher took on the union. So it's a kind of reversal of that initial coup, I suppose, that was so successful in the 1980s. And that's still, I think, super relevant. It's a theme that's continued through all my writing since then. It's about how we build power from the ground up to shift the balance of power within society.
Your new book is about vulture capitalism, right? And you talk about this in Stolen. So what is vulture capitalism?
So vulture capitalism is both a specific thing and a kind of general phenomenon. If you look at, like, the role of vulture funds within capitalism, for example, these are funds that buy up distressed assets. So, you know, this is the metaphor of the vulture that's like feeding on dead animals. Funds that buy up assets that are kind of, you know, either have like fallen in value quite a lot. So this might be, for example, housing in a depressed area of a town or city. A vulture fund might buy up all of those assets in the wake of a big financial or housing crisis, and then enclose those assets and use them to kind of generate profits over the long run. But also, and an example that I look at in this book is the example of, you know, a particular vulture fund that bought up the government debt of a country, Zambia, when that country was in debt distress, on the basis that that country would default on its debts, and then the firm could sue the government of Zambia for defaulting on its debts. So it bought up this asset, which it knew was going to have with it a potential legal obligation on the part of the government of Zambia, and bought it up in order to basically extract, you know, wealth and income from the people of that country. And yeah, this is a kind of general phenomenon, I guess, of powerful investors, powerful kind of vested interests being able to buy up and enclose assets, especially during moments of crisis, and then use that that moment of crisis to kind of consolidate their control and their power over a particular area of, let's say, an economy, or indeed of the global economy in general. And that's kind of a trend that I look at in the book. It's just like the growth of corporate power over all areas of our lives, of the growth of the power of financial institutions, linking back to the arguments I made in Stolen, but also how governments have facilitated the growth in that power rather than undermining it, as we might often think.
Then on that note, if this is obviously a really important question, if we, the people, were then going to take on the banks, what bird would you assign us?
That's such a good question. I don't think I'm a good enough ornithologist to be able to answer that question. I don't know enough about like the nature of birds. To be fair, vultures, I'm told, are kind of much maligned because they play a very important role in the ecosystem. So I feel like, you know, that was kind of an unfair comparison. So I don't know. I mean, what birds could we be? Birds that, like, I don't know if there are many bird species like this, but birds that work together to achieve things collectively and kind of empower each other. There
It's
must
not going to be a magpie. I've seen magpies beat each other up.
Yeah, so not that.
Not that. Pigeon, seagulls, they've got quite good mob mentality.
Yeah, maybe that, but like in a more positive sense. Maybe like seagulls, but instead of, you know, taking chips from people, we're like taking the resources that the wealthy have hoarded.
What if, say, you know how in the center of the city of London, you can have an offshore account. This is kind of how they do this, and then they hide assets through these family organizations. So what if just the whole of the people, we form an offshore account registered in the city of London? We have all our papers go into this.
That would be an easier way to do this, which was just like, if people, you know, think a tax is unjust, they just don't pay it. The example for that would be like the poll tax, right? When Thatcher tried to introduce the poll tax, there was a mass campaign of civil disobedience, which was like, we're not paying this tax. There was a similar movement recently around energy bills, but that struggled to get off the ground. And the issue there, it wasn't to do with, you know, whether or not that was the right thing to do, or whether or not there was a more sophisticated way we could have organized, you know, a campaign like that. It was an absence of a sense of collective power. So because we live in these individualized societies, people think, oh, I can't just not pay my energy bill alone. Back when people were resisting the poll tax, we lived in a much more collectivist society. So loads of people came together in their neighborhoods and their communities and throughout the country to say, we're going to work together and we're going to resist this. But today we live in much more individualistic societies, which means it's harder for people to understand the way that collective action works. So the biggest problem to that plan wouldn't be like setting up the trust and putting all our money in it. It would be convincing everyone to work together closely enough to actually manage it. And if they were able to do that, then they could do loads more radical things anyway.
Yes. And forget about the vultures, it's the seagulls, the Seagull Alliance. Oh,
That's what you want to look out for.
the Seagull Alliance, yes.
That will herald the revolution when the seagulls start organizing. The orcas are already organizing, actually.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was fun. This was
Yeah.
definitely the most off the wall interviews that I've done recently. I love it. I would expect nothing less from Repeater.